Teachers must have a fundamental belief that man, meaning women too, we're not leaving you all out, is capable of self-improvement. Perhaps Bobby Kennedy best expressed this when he stated, "What we require is not the self-indulgence of resignation from the world, but the hard work to work out ways of fulfilling our personal concern and our personal responsibility." And I think, this is my husband's speech, and I think he really hit it when he said, it's your responsibility. Whether you're my age, 96, or whether you're 10 or 5, you have a responsibility to respect other people, to believe that people are as good as you are, and you have a great responsibility to try to learn something, so that if you ever get to be 96, you will know a little. You ain't gonna know much, but you'll know a little.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for another edition of the Oral History Project. Is a collaboration with Martha's Vineyard Regional High School. Myself, Levi Vanderhoop, I'm a senior at the high school, and the Association for the Study of African Life and History, the ASALA organization, and MVTV, the community television. And today, I am joined by Mr. Robert Hayden, a author of over 25 books on African American history. And thank you so much for taking the time and joining us here today.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking with you. Well, let's have that conversation.
All right, let's jump right in. So now, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the books that you've written and maybe how you got into them?
Okay, books and my life. Let's go back to the beginning. When I turned 5 years of age, on August 21st, 1937, my mother said, "Now, you've got to get a library card. We're going to the library." And the library was only a few steps from our house. It was a little storefront, it wasn't very big. So we walked down to the library, and I remember we went to a little desk about the size and shape of this table and got my library card, and they were on the right side, the left side, all these books on the shelf. And she said, "Well, now we've got to get something to read." Well, I'm only 5 years old. I wasn't even really reading them, but we should have to get something to read. And so she picked out a book for me, and it was about the size of 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And we checked it out. And it was a brown-covered book about that thick. It wasn't very thick, less than 1/4 of an inch, on the life of Dr. George Washington Carver. You ever heard of Dr. Carver? He's a plant scientist, botanist, educator.
I believe so, yes.
So we took the book home, and we sat on the porch, and she read the book to me. It wasn't a long book, but she read it. It was a very short book. And I was in awe. I was just amazed to hear about somebody who had taken a peanut, or peanuts, and developed chemically over 300 substances from the peanut shell, the peanut covering, and the peanut itself. And I swear to this day that I had made a decision, maybe unconsciously, but along the way, that I was going to be a George Washington Carver, that I was going to do what he had done with the peanut in his laboratory at Tuskegee Institute, which is a historically black college, as you probably know. I can't say that my mother reading the book and getting the book off the shelf hooked me to reading, because I was just a kid and I liked to have fun all the time, so I wasn't much of a reader. But I spent summers looking at ants, looking at insects, looking at flowers, because this is what Dr. Carver did. So I used to enjoy just looking at nature and looking at life. In this case, in New Bedford, Massachusetts, where I was born, where I lived. So that first book, that very first book, that I didn't read, but that my mother read to me, I think gave me an idea about what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to be George Washington Carver. So that's one slant on books in my life.
Okay. So now you have one of the books that you've written here, and could you tell us a little bit about the process of writing the book?
Mm-hmm. Well, in all of my writings, most of it, I've written about somebody else's life, biography, but I've also written autobiographies for several people who weren't able to write it, but I would do the writing for them. But in most of my books, I would say 75% of them, were based on doing oral history interviews. I going out and sitting and talking with people about their lives, about their relatives, about their experiences. So getting first-hand information for people who experience certain things and live through certain things is very important, to go to the source, because many of the people that I wanted to interview were elderly people, long in age. Many of them knew that they weren't well. And so it was important to get their voice, to get their experience, to get their information firsthand. Then that would lead me then to letters, artifacts, other evidence of their life or the life of the person that they're writing about. On this particular, no, I didn't bring my book. I did a book on a black doctor from New York City, from Harlem. And it was a fellowship that I had to study his life. His name was Dr. Lewis Tompkins Wright. And he was a hospital developer and a surgeon and so on. I had the whole year in New York City. I'll tell you about that experience in a few minutes. But I had the whole year in New York City doing research on this one person. And I actually did 64 audio-taped interviews with 64 people. Former patients of Dr. Wright, nurses that he worked with, his colleagues in medicine, people in the health field. It took me a whole year just gathering all this information. But every day, every other day, traveling through Brooklyn, New York, Queens, New Rochelle, New York, finding these people who could tell me about Dr. Louis Wright. So I learned a lot about Dr. Wright, whom I'm going to write a book on, by talking to other people. Oral history, okay? And that's a whole strategy and technique in itself. But interviewing people is very, very important in the work that I try to do about writing about other people's lives. In 1975, 1976, my book on black doctors came out, was published, okay? And in that book, I had 9 chapters in the book on doctors, physicians. I had 9 people, and one of them was Dr. Louis Wright. I interviewed his wife. I spent all day on a Saturday in Upper Manhattan interviewing her, for example, and so on. And I went on and interviewed a number of other people. I was on a fellowship. I had a grant to do this work, which I was very, very fortunate, from the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And so I had decided when I had finished the chapter and it was published that this is the guy I'm going to write about. Because I had always wanted to write about somebody else. I always said, someday I'm going to do a biography. At the time, in the mid-'70s, I'm not sure who it was going to be. But it turned out to be Dr. Wright, Dr. Louis Wright. He was my man. And what's interesting about this book, however, is that once I finished my year in New York City, I had to go back to work, okay? So I had family, I had children, and so on. So I didn't have a lot of time to continue the research and to do the work to get ready to write this biography of Dr. Wright. I didn't get a chance to do that until 1992. So it was 16 years before that I had the idea that someday I was going to write about somebody's life. And it ended up being Dr. Lewis Tompkins Wright. Somebody that I, of course, never met. He died in 1952. But he was one of the leading doctors, physicians in all of America. And so I was fortunate to have this fellowship at the Schomburg Research Center to be in New York. I moved to New York. I actually lived there full time. I was out every day, traveling around New York, meeting people, doing research, going to libraries, etc. So again, it was 16 years, and I always tell students, you have an idea of something you want to do someday, it'll happen, but you have to be patient. You never know when it's going to happen. 16 years later, I was able to work, because I retired. I retired in 1992. And I had a consulting business and doing some teaching, but had the time to work on the book. But the book didn't come out until 2003. It took me all that time to process all that information that I had collected, okay? I was fortunate in that Mrs. Lewis Wright, his wife, had saved all of Dr. Wright's papers, his letters, his manuscripts, all the speeches that he ever gave, and she donated 10 boxes of clippings, news clippings, letters, all kinds of souvenirs from Dr. Wright's life. All that stuff was at Harvard University right here in Boston. So I was able to spend time here in Boston doing a lot of research. Remember, I had 10 boxes of materials that I had to go through. So I have all this material now. I have the oral history interviews, and I had enough to really do a full life story on Dr. Wright.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you weren't able to do it right away because you had to take some time off to do work and family.
Yeah,
What were you doing at the time for work?
What was I doing? Well, I had retired. Let's go back to my first 4 books. In 1968, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, I was working for Xerox Corporation in their education division. I was a science editor. I majored in the sciences way back. Maybe we can get to that in a few minutes. But I was working in Connecticut for 2 years. Had moved there, bought a house. And King was assassinated. And the higher-ups in Xerox education department came into my office 2 days later and said, we got to do a book on black history. They called it Afro-American history at the time, or Negro history. We need to do a book. We'd like you to write a book on, a survey book, it wasn't a big book, survey of African-American history. And they asked me if I'd be willing to do that. So that kept me busy back in the, let's say 1968. I left Xerox in 1969, moved back to Boston, and took over the Metropolitan Council for Educational Opportunity, better known as the METCO, M-E-T-C-O. That was a program that is still going on today, this day, where black students began to attend schools in suburban communities, taking buses out to 7 suburban school districts, because the Boston school system's educational program was very weak, very inferior. Black parents, black neighbors, black activists, and students themselves had fought the Boston School Committee all through the 60s, trying to get changes in the school system. And the Boston School Committee never made any changes. The school system continued to be in a bad shape. So some families, some parents, some students had to find an escape from the Boston system, okay? And so this program was started in 1966. I was still in Connecticut at the time. But I had been working as a science editor, okay, up until that time, at Xerox. And I came back and I really decided that I wanted to do something else. And I was motivated to look at the civil rights issues. And in 1970, I applied to be the executive director of the Metropolitan Council for Educational Opportunity. So I was selected to head that. That's a private organization using public money. Started in September of 1966 with 220 black students living in Roxbury, living in Dorchester, living in Mattapan in Boston, who started riding buses to 7 suburban schools. And these suburban schools had school committees who were willing to take students who voluntarily decided they wanted to get out of Boston. And so every day they were on the buses going back and forth. I left the program 3 years later, 1973, and that particular year I had 77 buses and vans running every day from Boston, taking 3,200 students to over 28 suburban communities. Well, I had never done anything like that before, but I felt it was important that this program be maintained, that it got stronger, that it wasn't going to be wiped away by politicians or by the State Department of Ed. And I thought I would have a lot to bring based on previous experiences, particularly in curriculum, to lead this program. And so I did that for 3 years. So that got me up to about 1973. And I left METCO after 3 years. I wanted to get the doctorate degree that Vivian just talked about, which I never got. But I wanted to go back to school to get my doctorate degree. And that was one reason I left METCO. The other thing about METCO was that it was a program where I, as the director, had to be ready and work, and I did from 7 in the morning up until 10 at night. It was that kind of a job. And it burned you out. You just couldn't work that pace, you know. But It was one of the most important decisions that I made. I felt very passionate about the program. But I'm a long ways from it today, but I still have a lot of passion for it. I still love to talk about it. And that's maybe sometime we'll have more time to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you were in the science and education, and obviously
Remember,
you have
yeah.
a lot of
Remember,
history here.
Remember, it was George Washington Carver's life as a scientist, as a chemist, as a plant scientist, as a botanist. He studied plants. That got me on the scientific track, okay? And so I enjoyed science all through school. I loved chemistry. I loved physics. I swear today, as I told you before, that my learning about Carver and his work hooked me, okay? So I majored in biochemistry. I majored in biology with chemistry as a minor. And I went to Boston University. By the way, parenthetically, I only applied for 3 colleges when I finished New Bedford High School. I applied for 3 colleges: UMass Amherst, Northeastern University, and Boston University. And by the spring of 1955, when I finished high school, all 3 colleges had rejected me. I didn't have an acceptance. I was panicking. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do. Where I didn't know I wasn't going in the military. I know that I couldn't do anything in a trade. But anyways, Boston University, I think as a second look at my credentials and my experience. My grades weren't all that great. I was a B minus, C plus student. They invited me to come to Boston on a Saturday to take an exam. So I took the bus from New Bedford to Boston, went to Boston University, sat in this room of 100 students for 3 hours taking this exam. Wasn't quite sure why, but I went through the paces and did it. Lo and behold, 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Boston University accepting me into the College of Liberal Arts, okay? That's the only college that accepted me, and that was after taking a second look. So if they hadn't accepted me, I probably might not have been sitting here with you today. I would have probably been gone someplace else, I'm not sure what. Let me go back to something I think is important for you and for all students, high school students, middle school students, college students, is you got to study a little bit of everything. You need to study psychology, sociology, economics, all the disciplines, okay, including science. You need a multidisciplinary background. In high school, I was fortunate. There were 400 students in my high school in New Bedford, probably 8 to 10 black students out of that 400. But there were 2 black teachers. Both of them had grown up in New Bedford, got college degrees at black institutions and so on. One of them was Mr. Melva Felton. Mr. Felton was a math teacher. Now, all the black families and black people in New Bedford at that time knew each other, so he knew who I was before I even got to high school. I remember him talking to me in my freshman year. Well, now, Robert, what are your plans for the future? What are you going to be doing? And I said, I'm going to be a biologist, Mr. Felton. I want to study biology. And he said, okay, Robert, fine, but be sure you get a liberal education. Sophomore year, same kind of questions, same kind of direction, but be sure you get a liberal education. Going into my 3rd year, okay, taking mathematics with him, he said the same thing. And now I'm graduating, and he said, now, it's wonderful, I'm glad you're going to BU. And I said, but I want to study biology. All I wanted to do was biology. I didn't want to do anything else. He said, but you got to get a liberal education. Well, I didn't know what the word liberal meant. I'd never heard anybody talk about what's a liberal education. I didn't know it was something you majored in. I was too embarrassed, I guess, whatever I want to call it, to ask him, well, what's the liberal education? So I didn't ask him the question because I thought, well, I think I'm stupid or something. So I never did ask him. So I went off to college. And science majors at BU, Washington University at that time, if you majored in biology, chemistry, or physics, you had to take scientific German. You didn't have to speak German, but you had to be able to read it. Because if you look at the history of science in the world, many, many of the leading pioneers in all the scientific math fields came out of Germany. Okay, and so you had to be able to read research papers and things that may have been in German. So I took German number 1, introductory German, and then I took scientific German, and I loved it. It was fun reading it, learning the language simply by reading it. 20 years later, I'm doing research on Dr. Charles Henry Turner, African-American scientist who studied the behavior of insects and ants, okay? I'm doing research on his life, and you asked me how I get this information doing research. I was doing research on Dr. Charles Henry Turner, and learned that he had made observations of ant behavior, where this particular species of ant would come out of the hole in the ground and would come out in a circular pattern out to the nest in the ground, pick up a grain of salt or whatever it was they were taking back to it, and the ant would come back in the same spiral or circular pattern. And it came to be known as Turner's circling in the field of animal behavior science. Ants and bees, of all things, okay? He wasn't studying dogs or cats or monkeys or anything or larger animals. He was studying insects, okay? So I wanted to understand Turner's circling. What the hell was Turner's circling? I had read about it, and it was a little note in one of the books and so on. But I learned about a book at the Boston Public Library. I went to the Boston Public Library and didn't realize that reading the card file that this was in German. So here I am 20 years later needing to know how to read a page and a half of German so I could understand what Turner's circling was. Okay, so that's an example. Now the other example that I have about being interdisciplinary for students and to take a reading and a course in all the subjects. Halfway through my years at Boston University, I was there BU for 4 years, I got a letter from the dean, academic dean. I got a letter to me, and it was about 1957, 58. And she said, well, you've taken all the science that we're going to allow you to take. I had taken every biology course that Boston University offered. Boston University was known for its biology department. So you could study herpetology, which is study of reptiles. You could study ichthyology, the study of fish. You could study anything. So I had bacteriology, microbiology, biochemistry. I had taken all the science. She said, but you don't have a distribution. I said, what's a distribution? She said, you have to have courses in the humanities. You've got to have psychology, sociology, economics, okay? So I had done all the science. Now I had to go get the humanities courses, which included history, which I didn't like. Surprisingly, I ended up being in history, as you cited earlier. But that's another example of that liberal education. So once I had that experience with Boston University, I had to take these other courses. In order to be granted a degree, a Bachelor of Arts degree, I had to take all these humanities courses. That's Mr. Felton's, God bless you, Albert Felton, for introducing me, or at least trying to introduce me to a liberal education. And it's interesting, too, I wasn't just admitted to Boston University, I was admitted to the College of Liberal Arts. So it was right there. It was right there. So I say to you, and I say to all students, middle school, high school, college, study as many different subjects as you can. If you're going to be a linguist and you're going to study linguistics, you're going to be studying anthropology, okay? So that means you're going to have to take some anthropology. So take a little bit of everything, economics. You never know what you're going to need, what you're going to be called upon, what projects you might have in linguistics. It might need another language, for example.
All right, now we have a lot of these awards on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give maybe a little bit of background as to some of these awards and how you obtained them?
Yeah. People who write, like I have written, and other people who have done things, are given appreciation and acknowledgement for the work that you've done. I've written a little over 25 books, special educations, articles, and so on, for a variety of sources. And I've gotten a number of awards. And all these awards are very special to me. And I brought a couple of them to share with you. And I can read this. Can you read that? Okay. Can you read the top line here?
If I have a legacy to leave my people, it is my philosophy of living and serving.
And this award came from the Association for the Study of Afro-American History. Every year they give out the Mary McLeod Bethune Award. And I received the award, what's the year on here? I've forgotten now, I can't remember the year.
2009.
2009, I received this award from the Association, Afro-Life and History, in Cincinnati at the annual meeting of the association. Mary McLeod Bethune was part of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal cabinet. She was an educator. She founded Bethune-Cookman College. She was a former president of the association. I could go on and on and on about Mary McLeod Bethune. But she's somebody that, as I studied history, learned a lot about. So getting this award, which I was surprised, they never tell you who's going to get this award. getting this award, I was surprised but so excited, and still excited to have this award in her name. Have it in her name. So that's just one of my 20 plus awards. It's always good to be recognized by your home folk, your home brothers and sisters. And I brought this one along, and I won't take the time to read it. I think there's a year on here. What's that year?
That is 1993.
1993. This was awarded in New Bedford, Massachusetts, in my home city where I spent the first 17 years of school and so on. And then I left New Bedford. When I went to Boston University, I never went back to New Bedford. Okay, I stayed in Boston. I went to Connecticut for 2 years, but basically my life, my family, everything was in Boston. But I was called back to New Bedford to receive this award from the Carney Academy of Community and the Black Community in New Bedford. So to have this from people that I hadn't seen in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, because I had left New Bedford, but people were aware of my work. I had been in New Bedford before speaking about some of my work. So this is very special because it came from my hometown, people I went to high school with, and those before and those after. This one, I can read this one. I ended up in the early 1980s, and I won't go all the details in between, becoming special assistant and then deputy assistant of schools in Boston. I was the deputy superintendent. And one of the things that I did my first year at the Boston Public Schools was to establish a Martin Luther King celebration on his birthday time. And so I was the one who put this plan together to honor for the school system, elementary, middle, and high school teachers, parents, everybody, to honor Dr. King. And that practice is still going on every year. Okay, I used to have a committee that I put together. And so I received this from the second superintendent that I worked under, Dr. Levi Wilson. He was an African American, and he was the second superintendent that I worked for. But I got this award, and it says, the Boston Public School Community honors Robert C. Hayden for keeping the significance of Dr. Martin Luther King's dream alive in the hearts and minds of all of us. And it's signed Dr. Levi Wilson, so anyway, this was a very special award, and I'm so proud of it because the programs, every January, they have the Martin Luther King Day in the Boston Public Schools. And this is recognition and appreciation for getting the ball started on that, and it's still there. So that's just some sampling of it. I have a lot of, all the awards are appreciated. They're all wonderful to have, but these are just three that kind of special.
Okay. And I noticed that you have some of these sculptures. Is this something new that you have started?
Yeah, it's another part of my life. You can hold this one. I always had thoughts and dreams about things I wanted to do, things I wanted to be. George Washington Carver is one of them. I admired artists, painters, sculptors, cartoon developers. I enjoyed sketching things myself, and I always wanted to do something creative. Now you look at where I took you from George Washington Carver through all these other things that I just talked to you about. Okay, I still always had, I wanted to do something artistic, something creative. I didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't have any schools or workshops to go to. They were there, but I didn't take advantage of them. But I always had lurking in the back of my mind, I want to do something creative, something artistic, okay? Well, I woke up one night about 5 years ago now, I guess it's been 5 years, of doing what I call beach stone art, okay? All of the stones in these creations, and you're holding them now in the hopes that the audience can see them, all of these stones came from beaches on Martha's Vineyard. And I began to think about a way of putting them together. And so you see what I've selected here, 3 different stones. These are not rocks, okay? Stones are rough. They have sharp edges. They're not as geometrically shaped by the water and by the sand at the ocean shore, okay? But I had an idea. And I began to collect more and more stones. And I must have 200 stones in my basement today because I've made over 125 of these sculptures, as you can see. They're glued together with monster glue. They'll never come off. So there's no two alike. Each one is different. I call it beach stone art. I've had a chance to exhibit this in Florida in 2 different places, in Boston and here on Martha's Vineyard. And so this was my creativity. This was my creative art that I knew someday I'd do something. I wasn't sure what it was going to be. This is it. I actually won first place prize in sculpture at the All Island Art Show here on Oak Bluffs about 4 years ago now. First place for this particular type of sculpture. You know. So this, in my retirement years, this is what I do in retirement, dreaming about putting these things together and fitting them and making them look artistic, has fulfilled that desire. I've enjoyed doing it. I have fun doing it. I'm not sure I'll ever get rid of 100 plus, but I enjoy making them, okay? You see how nice and smooth they are. They're shiny because I put varnish on these to make the colors come back out. When you pick up the stone like this at the seashore or the seascape, they're wet and the colors come out. As soon as you take them out of the water, salt water, they'll dry up pretty quickly and they'll be very dull. To bring the color back in after I've attached them to the base here, I then with a brush, within 2 or 3 minutes, just varnish them and the colors come right back out. So that's what you're looking at here. And every one is different. This has the same general design, but again, different sizes, different shapes, different colors. So that's my beach stone art. That's my creativity. And I have fun going. I still go to the seashore. I went 2 weeks ago. Weather's better now. And I'm still collecting these things. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but I love to collect them. And the people say, how do you put these together? By the way, I use monster glue. Monster glue is probably the fastest drying, toughest glue that you can use for something like this. And all you need is a drop of glue, just a drop of glue, eye drop full, just between the stone and the base that it sits on. And that's what you get, how you get that effect. Okay.
Okay, so is there any final thoughts?
I didn't put everything in chronological order, but we won't try to do that now. I've kind of jumped around.
Yeah.
My writing days are over. Everybody wants to still buy my books, okay? They're out of print. None of my books are in print. The book on Martha's Vineyard, African Americans on Martha's Vineyard, came out in July 4th weekend, 1999. And the book was launched that night at Cousin Rose Art Gallery. Cedar Cousins, are you familiar with the Cousins Art Gallery on Circuit Ave? So take a stroll this summer.
Yeah.
Find it. I think you'll find it interesting. Cedar Cousins started her gallery, art gallery, over 40 years ago. And I was talking with her one evening at her art gallery, right on Circuit Ave, lower Circuit Ave, right inside. And she said, you know, Bob, I'm going to be celebrating my 20th anniversary, that was it, coming out of her business, of her art gallery. And she asked me if there were any black history, blah, 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 in that area. People coming in asking for information. And there was nothing available. And then when she said to me that she was going to celebrate her anniversary in business, 20 years, I said, maybe I should do a book. Because I had done one on New Bedford. I had done one on Boston. Very similar, okay? Very similar. And I said, Zita, maybe I should do a book to honor and celebrate your creation, your gallery. And that's what I did. And for 2 years I worked on it. It took me all of 2 years, running all over Martha's Vineyard, knocking on people's doors, people who knew me, people I didn't know, collecting photographs. And that brings me to one of the points I'd like to make. That in all of my work, I've tried to incorporate photographs, okay? I think it's important that we have the visual evidence. I can talk to you about it, okay? But you're not going to really feel a pressure, a feeling for it, unless you get pictures. And so you've got over 100 pictures in this book. So that took me a while, too, just to collect the pictures and get pictures that were usable. And I only had one person in my whole experience who didn't like the photograph of her that was used in the book. And I actually didn't get that one from her. I got it from some other source. But I did the second edition of the book in 2005. I revised it, I updated it, and so I got the person to give me another photo, and I replaced her photo. And so anyways, photographs are also a very important source of information. What else do I say? I'm working on my own life story, my own autobiography. And it's getting harder and harder to do it as you move along in age. Your mind isn't always as quick and agile as it used to be. So I'm finding the writing chore taking a little more time, but I can't rush it. So I try to write every day. So my message is, if you want to be a writer and you enjoy writing, and I enjoyed writing, write a little bit every day. Write a little bit every day. Keep a diary. Do you keep a diary of what you do every day?
No, I don't.
Well, you probably should get a special book and maybe start writing down every day, every other day, or on the weekends when you have more time to think, perhaps, about what you've done each day. Who knows, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to be one of the foremost linguist scholars in the country, in the world. Well, who is this guy? Where did he come from? Well, you can go back to your diary and read it and say, gee, that's me, that's what I did. So keep a record of things that you do. Keep correspondence. Letters that have come to me from people that I've written about. I wrote about my first book, I wrote about 7 scientists. The next book was on 8 inventors, people with U.S. patents, and one on the black doctors that I mentioned, okay? Charles Henry Turner, animal behavior scientist, Turner's circling, okay? I couldn't find any information on this guy. I mean, his name was mentioned in a few encyclopedias, both black and white, but there just wasn't a lot of information. Now, he lived and worked and taught school in St. Louis, Missouri, okay? I had information on the 8 of the scientists I wanted to write about, and I didn't succeed in finding information on Turner. But I looked at my notes, I looked at what information I did have, and I said that he taught biology at Sumner High School in St. Louis, Missouri. I said, well, maybe I should write to Sumner High School and see if they have anything in their school library, anything in the school records on Charles Henry Turner. So I wrote this letter off. I went to the Boston Public Library first and found a book of publication listing all high school principals in the country. I went to St. Missouri, I went over to St. Louis, and there was a blank space. There was no principal listed for Sumner High School. I said, well, I'll just write Dear Principal, Sumner High School, tell him who I was and writing what I was trying to do, and was there any information about him in your school archives? And I sent it off. About 3 weeks later, I got this special delivery mail, big envelope, urgent, rush, handle carefully, blah, blah, blah. It was a letter from Miss Julia Davis, who at the time was in her 60s and 70s. Her son was the principal at Sumner High School. So he gets the letter, he takes it to his mom, and she says, yeah, he was my biology teacher, okay? Well, that started a relationship for me and Julia Davis that lasted at least 20 years. She got so excited, she responded to my letter to her son. She responded to me telling me all about Dr. Turner and that he was her teacher in biology and science and so on, and that she was a historian. I remember sitting up that night typing up a letter to Miss Julia Davis, and she wrote back and said, I'm so excited that somebody's finally interested in one of my favorite teachers and important teachers. He was well known, right? Because he had a PhD in biology, by the way. So he taught biology at Sumner High School. So we had a flow of exchange back and forth, she and I, over a 10 to 15 year period. And we had never met, but it was also the mail. 2 or 3 mailings from that, getting the first letter from her, I got a package about so big, okay? And it was all wrapped in newspaper and brown paper, and it had big letters on it, important, handled with care and so on. So I took it home and I opened it, and you know what it was? It was her high school biology science notebook. She took notes every day about the lectures, and he would diagram the behavior of ants, bees, and wasps on the blackboard. All this stuff she copied into her note. You know how you take notes in a class? She had taken all these notes and drawn diagrams. She sent me the book. And it was old, it was yellowed, I should say green, it went from yellow to green. It was falling apart, but what a valuable source for me to have. So if you look at the chapter on Dr. House Charles Henry Turner today in my book on 8 Black American inventors, you will see sections that I took from Julia Davis's notebook and put them right into my story to show you the kind of work that he was doing, including Turner's circling. Okay. The other story I like to tell is that I had a hard time finding information on Garrett Morgan. Garrett Morgan had 2 inventions, one for a gas mask, and the other was for I can't remember now. Oh, a hair lotion for hair care. And I couldn't find any information. I did find the son's address, so I wrote to him. And he responded by sending me all this stuff in the mail, including advertisements that Dr. Morgan used for his inventions, and the sales pitches that he made, the marketing that he did. All that material came from the son. And one of the items that he sent in the package was a paper that his daughter, Dr. Morgan's granddaughter, had written when she was in 7th grade. And the assignment was, as his father tells me now, you had to write about somebody famous. Well, who was more famous than her father? Garrett Morgan, the inventor. He's in my book now. But again, here's where I get first-hand information. So that letter, that paper that she saved all those years, through high school and through college, he had a copy of it, and they sent it to me. And that helped me to write the chapter and to find out what kind of a person, who was this person, Garrett Morgan. So a lot of the research takes time. You never know whether you're going to get a response from people. But I've been fortunate in tapping the right people, being able to get them to respond, so that I have first-hand information, in this case from Morgan's granddaughter, from the other case from Julia Davis, who was a student at the Teachers College way, way, way back. Okay, and I can give you more and more examples, but I think that's enough of those examples. Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening, and I'm very proud of you taking the initiative to do these special studies that you're going to be doing. And good luck,
All right.
as they say.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. That is going to wrap up all of our time here today. Thank you very much, Mr. Hayden.
My pleasure.
For joining us again.
My pleasure.
And we will see all you guys next time.